attitude. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
So Attitude is a grade 4 drum piece from Rockschool. So it's a song, feels a bit like Guns N' Roses, and you can look at the notes here. Classic rock. It has this driving floor tom rhythm here, and all the semiquavers are expressed as swung or slightly swung. Crotchet is set at 105 beats per minute. Classic rock, which is the type of music. Slightly swung, which doesn't mean but da 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 da, it means dum da da dum da. So it's slightly sticky in terms of one da da. So the second and fourth semiquaver are slightly closer to the next beat. One and the accents are important. I'm pretty sure I've demonstrated them properly. I will be moving towards getting more mics and stuff like that to get a better sound, but it's a lot better than what I had back in 1988. 1, 4, and D. So sometimes a quaver, which is just one tail, sometimes a semiquaver, and the accents you just lay down. 1 and 2, 3, and 1 and 2, D down, 3, D down, 4 and 1, E and 2, D and 3, D and snare, floor. And then pretty much more of the same kind of groove here. That's the same as that, but except the 4 and D on the snare, 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 crash, and D2, D down, D3, D and 4 and D, snare, floor, 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 with the bass on the and D, 2, 3 E and with the bass strong on tom tom, high tom or tom 1, snare, floor, creates a bit of space, more of the same, but D2, D down, D3 E and 4, floor, floor, crash, crash, crash. So that's 1 E and E, 2 E and 3 E. So the fourth quaver is crashed as well, crash bass, 2 and rest, and 4 floor, floor, 4 and E on the floor, floor, crash, and then you got this slightly on the hats this time. So whereas you're doing the kind of driving rhythm on the hats, now you were doing it on the floor before. Crash, 2 E and 3 E and 4 and open. So that would be snare with the right, left, right for the open. 4 E and, 4 E and. So right, left, right for the open, close the bass snare. And you're doing this with the hats on the right, left, driving it with your right, left on the hats. And then your right is on the snare. That's why it's rested with this semiquaver or 16th note rest. And then you go 1 E and E, 2 E and E, 3 E and 4 E and where are we? 1 E and a snare, the bass, the 3 E and 4 E and the bass, the bass, snare, the bass, E and open. And then this is just snare on the right, left on the hat, right, left on the snare. Stand, da, da. Snare on the right, right, left. And then that covers that. And you'll see it in the demonstration. 1 and the bass down, the snare, the bass, the open, close. I mean, I closed it with the snare. I don't know why they specify closing it on these subsequent hats. It just doesn't make sense. I disregard that. So yeah, I draw a line under these particulars. Maybe that's why I'll never get into the conservatorium of drumming. 1 E, E, 2 E and a 3 E and 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a hat open, snare, da da da. Just close the hat and the snare or the subsequent beat as directed. 1 E and bass, snare, the bass, the D and 4 floor. See, they open it there, but they don't specify where you close it. So what the hell does it matter? Crash and then this is crash bass, and this is on the right, and it's just straight up eighth notes or quavered ride cymbals. Crash, right, and then on the 3 and the 4 you hit the middle of the ride cymbal called the bell of the ride. Bell, ding, snare with a bell, ding, bass with a bell, ding, snare, ding. I got most of these. Similar rhythm, just follow the vertical rule, which was from top to bottom. When you look here for the crash, and then whatever note you hit, sometimes a bass and sometimes a snare, sometimes a ride, sometimes a bell, and then ride, crash, rest, and 3 and 4 and D. That's a snare floor, snare and a floor together. Crash, D, snare, D, bass, snare, bass, snare, bass, snare, ride, bass, ride, snare, bass. More of the same groove. Crash, snare, bass, big and strong. Dip down to P, and get quiet here, and then get louder. This is a crescendo mark until you get to F. 1 and 2, and with the snare floors and a bass, and sometimes just a snare floor on the ends. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Bass, crash, ding, snare, crash. And this is the bit that reminds you of Guns N' Roses, Sweet Child of Mine, which they're trying to emulate. So crash, ding, snare, crash, ding, snare, ding, crash, ding, snare, crash. So crash on the 1, crash on the 2 end, all the way through the bars. Sometimes a bass, sometimes a snare, sometimes an extra bass here, but it's pretty much the same until you get crash, ding, snare, crash, bass, snare, floor, da 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 da. Snare, crash, bass, snare, crash, bass, snare, bass, snare, crash, bass, snare, crash, snare, crash, da 4 and E, 1 E 2, oh, can't even count, 3 E4 and E, and then you, whatever you do in this drum solo, which you can do whatever you like as long as it's in the genre of classic rock, you go down and you're basically doing the same rhythm as 1 and 2 and boom, bada da 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 boom, bada boom, and same. But then they went boom, da da. So you just hit the crotchet, emphasize the crotchet, and then lead up into going to the DC, which means to the capo, the captain, the head, the very start. And then you do this again, but this time I don't think I did a great job at this improvisation bit, but it's for the purposes of my students growing and developing and having a conversation based on this sort of stuff. So all the way through you can stick to the same rhythm, but I just did more triplets and more stuff around the drum kit, and then and then you go to the end. It's the same as this, except you've got a snare drum in between. Bon ducky crash, bon eat crash, crash bass there, crash rest, crash bass, and then you finish it. Thanks for watching.